Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Harlow, and I work with VSAC's Career and Education Outreach Program. I'm happy to see you all tonight, and we're ready to talk about financial aid and managing college costs. Now, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight really involve things happening this year. So I'll be referring to seniors and parents of seniors quite a bit. But if there are juniors on the feed and parents of juniors here, just know when I'm talking about things, I'm really referring to this year's seniors, but we can also give you some information as the parent of a junior. So let's get started. VSAC is a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1965. We're here to ensure that Vermont students and families have the information, assistance, and financial aid that they need to achieve goals for college and beyond. We help people not only with funding education that you think of like college or university, but also trade programs and short-term training. We have a number of programs to help people to fund those as well. As the parent of a recent college graduate, I just want to acknowledge everyone's concerns. It can be overwhelming when you think about the idea of how you pay for college and how do you even go about finding the resources. This presentation is really intended to provide a general overview, so I will not be covering everything there is to cover, but maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the roles that you as families play, as well as options you may have, and maybe a couple of things that you haven't thought of before. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but we have a bunch of resources on our website, and there are also videos that Federal Student Aid has available also on YouTube, where families can use that information for assistance with filling out the FAFSA, as well as with the financial aid process. When we're getting started, I really talk about how communication is the key to success when we are talking about planning for post-secondary education. You know, about plans, like students and parents' involvement in the college search and selection, and also using their resources like their counselors and teachers or advisors, coming up with good college matches that might meet expectations like distance, majors, housing, placement rates. Really, research involves also finding out the true costs, and we're going to talk tonight about net price, as well as other things like acceptance of AP or dual enrollment credit. And while it's great when everyone is on the same page from the start, it may be likely that some family and students, some parents and students could have some different unspoken expectations about this process, like whose responsibility it is to find schools to apply to, who's going to be completing steps in this process, who's going to be leading the financial aid process, and whose primary responsibility is it to come up with the funds to help pay. One of the discussions you can have is who's going to have what roles in this process, and to what extent can you help each other? And how much can you afford? I mean, does someone have veto power in this? Talking through all of these thoughts and expectations in advance can really help families to focus on good college matches. Doing the research helps families make informed decisions that are not only well thought out, but hopefully also financially sound. Let's talk a little bit about college price. You hear when you buy a car about the sticker price. So what we're showing you right now is the sticker price of 5 different types of colleges. We're talking a private expensive college. We're using University of Vermont, Vermont State University, CCV, as well as a Vermont trade school on here. We have 2 Vermont trade schools that also accept federal student aid. One is the Aveda Institute, which is a cosmetology school in Williston, and the other is Advanced Welding Institute, which obviously people can study welding, and they're in South Burlington. So we wanted to give you like the vast range of this. And then also the all years, because when we're talking about the most expensive college, UVM and Vermont State U, we're talking about a 4-year degree. And this is assuming that there's no increase in cost over years. Community College of Vermont, if you're doing a traditional 2-year program, we included that, as well as the Vermont Trade School, which is only 6 months long. So you can see the timelines are different, the costs are really different. The idea is really just to have you be aware of the college's advertised price. If you've gone to a college fair, you may have heard a college say, oh, it costs this to attend here. And to acknowledge, what you're probably hearing about the cost of college, it's not totally exaggerated. Every college and trade or career school has a price, and you can see how it can add up. I just want to mention the cases above. The most expensive college, University of Vermont and Vermont State U, includes living on campus. So those costs include things like housing and also meal plans. And also all of them include non-billable costs like books, supplies, transportation, and some personal expenses. For CCV and the Vermont Trade School, this is the cost that's publicized for a student living at home with their parents. So it's not just tuition and fees, but it also includes the cost of commuting, books and supplies, as well as some personal expenses, probably lunches, but no room and housing costs. To give you an example, just real quickly, tuition and fees and books at CCV would probably be closer to $9,800 for an in-state student commuting from home. And for the trade school, tuition fees and books is really closer to $28,250 for a student commuting from home. But really, we don't want to know the sticker price. We want to know what it's going to cost us. So the cost of attendance minus the free money that a student would receive, which are grants and scholarships, equals what families need to pay. And it's really important to keep in mind this net price as opposed to the sticker price. And so what I'd like to do is show you those costs again, but show you the average net price for these schools. Again, it's the cost of the school minus the free money, and this is the average. So the most expensive college, you can see that cost comes down quite a bit. These are all averages for first year full-time students. And remember that the net price figures do not include things like student or parent loans or work study. This is just the cost of the school minus the free money. And while these are average net prices, I want to mention that dependent students who are Pell eligible can attend the University of Vermont tuition and fee free through the Catamount Commitment Program. If you're a student whose parents make less than $60,000 a year, you can also go tuition and fee free to the University of Vermont. And for Community College of Vermont, for families making less than $75,000 a year, CCV is tuition free through the 802 Opportunity Program. And so some families will find that their net price is even lower than what we're looking at here, while some might find that their net price is higher than the average amount published. But one of the things you can do is some research on colleges and programs, like do they have scholarships available for students with a certain GPA? And finding out about UVM Promise and the 802 Opportunity can help students and families understand about how college costs will sugar out for them, basically. In addition, there are some non-federal aid eligible programs in Vermont. So they're not eligible for federal student aid, but we do have something at VSAC called the Vermont Advancement Grant. And so those grants are based on a student's financial need. They don't follow the same process we're going to talk about tonight. But I just want you to know that if students are looking for short-term training and those programs are not eligible for federal aid, we have money here in Vermont to help students pay for those programs. Let me tell you about a great resource you can use. It's called the College Scorecard. This is one of my favorites. It is a website that's managed by the U.S. Department of Education. It's a government website, and it's a place to find colleges either by searching a specific name, or you can use a search where you're looking for distance or location or degrees offered or majors. But what I can tell you is that there's in-depth information about each college, their admissions, graduation rates, placement, and median salaries of recent graduates, as well as average net cost. And then they break it down further by income bands, so you can look at that. There are also links to college-specific net price calculators from this site, where you can find more very specific information based on a student and family's individual circumstances. What I should tell you with the College Scorecard is for state-supported institutions, they are listing costs for in-state students. So while University of Vermont, CCV, and Vermont State University will come through as pretty accurate, what you may find is if you're looking at, University of California, UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, that's going to be listing information for California residents. Another thing you can find here on the college scorecard, and this is really important, is you can find median salary information by major after graduation, as well as median federal debt by major. What I would like to recommend to you is that one helpful guideline that's recommended by financial folks is that students not borrow cumulatively more than they can reasonably expect to make the first year out of college. So I'm going to say that again. Students should not borrow cumulatively more than they can reasonably expect to make the first year out of college. And the college scorecard is going to give you some of that information. Naomi, do we have any questions coming up in the chat at this point?
All good, Carrie.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So let's move on and talk a little bit about the family's role, right? When we talk about this, we say the family has the primary responsibility to pay for higher education. So need-based financial aid is meant to assist families with paying for college, but they're still looking at the resources available to that family by looking at information about parents and students. Now I'm talking about need-based financial aid here, whereas there's this other thing called merit-based financial aid, which might be based on a student's grades or talents that a student has, or the fact that they've done a whole bunch of community service. So we want to think about families' role in this. And when applying for need-based aid, they are using that information to determine how much money the student needs in order to attend that college. And what this does not mean is if a college, costs $80,000 a year, you do not have to pull out your checkbook and write a check for $80,000. It just means that they're going to be looking at your financial need before they figure out how much you need to pay. So let's talk a little bit about the types of financial aid. This is really more of a refresher. I know a lot of people know this, but some people don't. So I always want to go back to the basics. First is grants. Grants is free money, and it's usually based on a student's financial need, but everybody loves grants because you don't have to pay them back and you don't have to work for them. If you apply and you're eligible and there's money available, you get it. Scholarships are also free money, but they're usually based on something: grades, student talent, ability, maybe an audition or a portfolio. Scholarships might be awarded by a college even as part of the admissions process. Congratulations, you've been accepted, and we'd like to offer you a $10,000 scholarship. Woo, we love that stuff. It is also, scholarships are also something that are free. You don't need to pay them back, and there is a little bit of work to get scholarships, but you do not have to work a job in order to earn the scholarship. I want to mention that VSAC has a number of scholarships. There are sometimes scholarships you can apply for through your local community. And also at CVU, for seniors, you want to be talking with your counselor in the Direction Center and find out what sorts of things are available to you. You may be able to find things on Naviance, or in the spring, there may be some applications available, but just keep that line of communication open with your school counselor because they're going to be the ones who have that information. In addition, there's work study. Work study, a student gets a job on campus and they work the hours and they get the money. It doesn't sound like financial aid, but actually the federal government pays colleges up to half of what students earn in order to help fund these jobs. So that's why it's considered financial aid. A student works in exchange for the money. So they have to find the job, they have to work the hours, and then they get the pay. Most colleges do not consider work study as money that's coming toward a student's bill. They're considering it money that's going toward a student's personal expenses, like doing laundry or getting coffee or having a pizza or something like that, going to the movies. The work study is usually used toward those personal expenses and not to pay down the bill. And then finally, there's loans. And everybody understands, I hope, what a loan is, where you borrow the money with the agreement that you're going to pay it back. And so there are education loans available for students and for parents, and we're going to talk more about those. But of course, they involve interest rates, repayment terms, and things that you will learn that will be different for every loan. Now, in order to get this financial aid, there are financial applications that students have to submit. And students have to submit applications every year that they want funding for college. So if a student's attending school for a 2-year degree, they're going to apply 2 years running. For students going to a 4-year institution, it's going to be 4 years running. But the first application and the main one is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. A lot of families will say to me during these workshops, should I really file the FAFSA? We don't think we're going to get anything. And I totally understand that. But what I will tell you about the FAFSA is, this is my elevator pitch, if you will. There are 3 reasons why you should file a FAFSA, even if you think you might not be eligible for aid. One is that some institutions will look at the FAFSA information to determine their merit financial aid, so their scholarships. And they won't award those without knowing that a student has exhausted all their other options for aid. So did they apply for federal financial aid? They did. In addition, if a student even wants a federal student loan, they have to file the FAFSA in order to get that. And then the third reason why people should file a FAFSA is things change. And unfortunately, my son attended college during COVID. And so what happened was a lot of students had situations where their families were losing their jobs, businesses closed, things happened. And having a FAFSA on file meant that students and parents could have conversations with financial aid offices. And with that FAFSA on file, they could very quickly make some moves to help the students. And so I mention that because hopefully we will never see another global pandemic. I'm looking to knock on something wood here. But what I will say to you is it's an insurance policy, if you will. So those are the 3 reasons why I'd say go ahead and apply, file that FAFSA. Another application is the Vermont Grant application. So VSAC administers the Vermont Grant. The state gives between $19 and $20 million each year to VSAC. VSAC awards every dollar of that money to students to study post-secondary education. And what I can tell you is that students can also take their state grant out of state. So if a student has eligibility for a Vermont grant, they can use that outside of Vermont. And I think that sometimes people don't realize that. And so that's one of the reasons they don't apply for a Vermont grant. There are also college financial aid forms. One that you may know of already is the CSS profile. The CSS profile is used by some pretty expensive schools with rather large endowments. They have a lot of money at stake and they're expensive schools. And so they want to make sure that their financial aid is going to students who truly need it. And you will find the CSS profile asks a lot more questions than the FAFSA does. So the CSS profile may be an application that students have to fill out. There is a list on the CSS profile website of all the colleges that use that financial aid form. Additionally, students will be filling out scholarship applications. And a lot of times scholarship applications usually happen during the senior year. And, for instance, VSAC has a scholarship application and our scholarship booklet. The booklets have been mailed to schools. So if CVU put in an order, there are some nice teal colored booklets that have VSAC scholarships listed in them. We also have that information available on our website as a PDF. We administer about 60 or so scholarships each year, and we use one unified scholarship application, which is due February 14th, 2024 for those seniors. And what I would say to you is you also have to get in an essay and some recommendations and a transcript. So please do not wait and file that application on February 14th. You need to file that application earlier to make sure you get all your stuff in. And then finally, there's loan applications. And we will definitely talk about loans during this presentation, but I want you to know about the loan applications is this happens much later in the process. So seniors in high school, you will apply for admission, you will apply for financial aid. You do not hear about financial aid until after you've been admitted to a college. And then when you hear about financial aid, you will eventually decide where you're attending school. And once you decide where you're attending and you know truly how much money you need to come up with, then you are applying for loans. So loans generally do not happen until later in the senior year. And probably we're talking about late May or June as a timeline for those loan applications. I have to tell you that this year, so it's the academic year of 2024-2025, the students who are seniors right now applying for that, there are some big changes coming to the FAFSA. And what I want you to know about that is we have been talking about these changes for years, and it's finally happening. And geeks like me are really, really excited about it. Families are like, it's a form, and we're going to fill it out. But I'm excited because it has to do with FAFSA simplification. And if you file the online application, which by the way, 99.7% of people who file the FAFSA file it online, there are fewer questions online. They now have a direct transfer of information that will happen right from the IRS, right into the FAFSA. If you filed a FAFSA a year ago, you had to leave the FAFSA to go to the IRS website. You had to go to the IRS website, put in your information precisely, because if anything is spelled wrong, if anything is not right, it would not come over. But if you could get it to come over, then you had to bring it back into the FAFSA. Now it's going to happen directly. You're just going to click a box that says, I consent. And that information will come right over. We're saying goodbye to this thing called the EFC, or expected family contribution. So if you've heard that term before, go ahead and forget it, because it's now the Student Aid Index, or the SAI. And it's a totally new calculation for determining student financial need. What we know from federal student aid is they are telling us this will make more students eligible for more financial aid. It will be a roles-based form, which means you will enter either as the parent or you will enter as the student. And people who contribute information to the FAFSA are called contributors. And so if you're having trouble deciding, they've developed a parent wizard that will be on the FAFSA to help you figure out whose information needs to go on the form. There's more information to come. And stay connected with us for more information, because things are changing still, even as we speak. They just opened up the FAFSA to more comments, if you can possibly believe it. And so there were things that people were sending in to federal student aid to make recommendations to still make the form better. But let's talk about how and when to apply. So there's that. Filing that FAFSA is really important. It is required to get a federal student loan. It's required for any federal aid program. Normally, it comes out in October, but this year it's available in December. We don't have a date yet. They're saying it's going to be available in December, but they have had to, because of this automatic transfer with the IRS that's written into the law. It is taking longer. They're having to do a lot of programming, and there's a lot of information security going on. So it will be available in December, but we don't have an actual day yet. Current seniors in high school are filling out the 2024-2025 version, so the year that the student will attend college. And I tell you that because right now the 2023-2024 version is up and will be up when the new FAFSA comes, because there are still people applying for financial aid in this coming January. So that is still up. You want to make sure that the student is filling out the right one. And then check college deadlines to make sure that you're meeting those. And one of the other changes to the FAFSA is now you can put up to 20 colleges to get your FAFSA information on that electronic form. It used to be only 10. I would hope that if you have more than 20 colleges, you're going to rethink that whole application process, because 20 applications is an awful lot. Right, Naomi?
Yes, that's way too many. A lot to manage.
I always ask counselors to just verify this, because I don't want to just impose my opinion on you. It's a widely held opinion that more than 20 is too many. Okay, so any questions about the FAFSA? Let me just say, one of the questions that we sometimes get is whose information goes on the FAFSA. And so they are calling people who contribute information to the FAFSA this year contributors. I want to be really clear, because it doesn't mean you're contributing money. it means you are contributing information, and that's why they're calling it contributors. And so who contributes information to a student's FAFSA? Most high school students need to have parental information on the form. And so which parents are on the form? If the biological or adoptive parents live together, it is both parents' information regardless of their marital status. If the biological or adoptive parents do not live together, it is the parent that the student was supported by more in the previous year. Now that might be, if the student lived with one parent more, there's something to be said for they put a roof over the student's head, right? But in shared custody arrangements, it's really going to be who provided more financial support. And really that is the question, who provided more financial support? And you can think about things like who has a student on their health insurance and who's, maybe supplying a car or something like that. But you want to think about that and who that person is who's going to contribute their information. If that parent who is no longer living with the other biological or adoptive parent has remarried, it is the parent and step parent whose information is on the FAFSA. Right.
Carrie, we do have a couple questions.
Sure.
We have a question about the later FAFSA date and how that impacts early action.
Okay, so that's a great question. Like, how does the FAFSA impact early programs, early admission programs, right? There's early action and early decision. The late FAFSA does not necessarily impact early action because with early action, there's no commitment. With early decision, there's a commitment. And the only way out of that is if the financial aid doesn't work. So it's really important if you are doing early decision to find out, is there an additional form you need to fill out and when? Because you might have to fill out that CSS profile by November 1st or November 10th or November 15th. And if that's the case, in order to find out about financial aid and you're applying early decision, you really need to do that. There are some colleges who do not use the CSS profile and they have early decision. You want to have a conversation with those colleges. If you have a student who's truly early decision for them, you need to have a conversation about how does this work, because we will not have our FAFSA filed. And if you don't have our financial information, how do we make this decision? I will tell you that right now, some colleges are saying, if we only use the FAFSA and the FAFSA is not out and your early decision, we recommend that you only apply early decision if finances are not a concern. And that's really important to keep in mind. If a college offers early decision and early action, I might lean toward early action just because you don't have that commitment and you have the time to get that FAFSA filed and processed.
Great, thank you.
You want to add anything to that, Naomi?
No, I think that's great. Thank you. So we do have a question about students who are taking a gap year and applying for financial aid.
Sure. So if a student's taking a gap year, they may want to apply if they're applying for college, and for instance, they're going to defer at that college for a year, they may want to go through the financial aid process to kind of get a feel for what this college is going to cost. And then when they're making the decision about deferring, what they may want to do is they may want to ask that institution, if everything stays about the same, what will my financial aid look like? Will it be different or will it be similar? So that's going to be an important question to ask, especially for students who are thinking about deferring. But if students do take a gap year, everybody files a new FAFSA the next year. And remember that FAFSA will open for the 2025-2026 school year. That will open October 1st of 2024. We'll be back to the October 1st open date for that.
Great. That's where we are right now. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about determining financial need. There is this new thing called the Student Aid Index, and how is it determined? Well, let me just say the EFC, the expected family contribution, was a misnomer, right? People thought the expected family contribution was what the family had to come up with. And many times families had to come up with more than the expected family contribution. And we would hear a lot of comments about, why do you even call it this? Because it's not what we had to come up with. So the SAI is really the starting point from which financial aid will be determined by federal student aid and also by colleges and also sometimes by scholarship programs. And what it's looking at is it's looking at the parents and the students' income. So for this year, when students are filing the 2024-2025 FAFSA, they're looking at parents and students' 2022 income. They are also looking at, and so think about this, that 2022 taxes that you filed last spring, or if you have a deadline that you're probably, or if you had an extension, excuse me, that you may be filing now. You want to think about that, like what is that income? And then next would be how many people live on that income. The SAI is then compared against federal poverty level. So they're using those 2022 poverty level information, and they're using percentages based on whether it's a single parent household or a double parent household. And they're using that to compare. And if an income is under that percentage of poverty level, that student will get a maximum Pell Grant. They're not even going to look at other things. They're just going to say, here's the income, great, your maximum Pell Grant, there you go. They're also looking at parent assets. So if a student's not eligible for the maximum Pell Grant, we're determining this SAI, they're going to look at the parents and the students' assets. We're not looking at cars. We're not looking at boats. We're not looking at even the family home. The FAFSA asks about assets like cash savings and checking accounts, real estate other than the family's primary home, as well as business or farm equity. So the value of that business or farm minus the debt against it. And also they look at the age of the older parent for dependent students. This is one of the few times in your life, folks, that you want to be actually older than you are, because the older you are, the closer you are to retirement and the more assets are protected as part of this calculation. Any questions about the SAI coming up? All right, so you heard me say there's no FAFSA until December, right? So what do we do in the meantime, folks? Well, what you can do is you can do this thing called create an FSA ID. It's basically creating a FAFSA account. And the student and at least one parent, a parent contributor on the FAFSA, needs to have that FSA ID. And you want to check deadlines. So for instance, is the CSS profile required for early decision? If it is, what is your deadline for that? Because you want to make certain to meet it. Or does the college have any other college financial aid forms that you may need to fill out if you are an early decision applicant? FAFSA is not opening until December, but you can apply for a Vermont Grant right now. And the Vermont Grant application is a piece of cake. The only question on the Vermont Grant application that students might have trouble with is that they ask about the parents. If the parents own their home, they don't rent, they ask about the value of that house and the debt against it. And so that's the hardest question on the Vermont Grant application. And students should also research and apply for VSAC assisted scholarships. Since you have this time, right? And if we're going to do a FAFSA forms night at CVU in January, and the deadline for VSAC scholarships is February 14th of 2024, we need to think about those deadlines, and you can get those VSAC scholarship applications started now if you want to. So let's talk about this thing called an FSA ID. Every student applying for federal aid has to create an FSA ID account. And at least one parent of any dependent student must also create their own. If you are a parent who has an older child who has gone to college, your FSA ID is your FSA ID. You can use it on other children's applications, so you don't need a new one. You just reuse the one you have. It does take some time to set up. There's more security, so they have more questions. They also have you set up two-factor verification. So every time you log into a FAFSA to contribute information, they will ask you to verify that you are who you are. And so I'm going to hold up my phone and I'm going to say that you will be getting an email or a text message with a code that verifies that you are who you are. Students who are setting up an FSA ID need to use a non-school email address, because at CVU, they turn off your CVU email after you graduate. Is that true, Naomi? You can just nod. Yes, okay, it is still true. My son went to CVU, and so I remember, I think it was July, after he graduated from high school, his CVU account went away. He didn't believe me. He found out. So I'm telling you now, create that non-school free email address that is career and college ready, and have it ready for your FSA ID. And you have to have the FSA ID applied for and verified in advance of filing a FAFSA. And that usually takes anywhere from 5 to 7 business days. I tell you that so that you know that it takes some time, and you need to allow yourself some time to fill out, to apply for that FSA ID. Any questions about the FSA ID, Naomi?
So no questions about the FSA ID, but it looks like we have a question looking for a little bit more clarification on if a child lives primarily with a parent and step parent, does the other parent's income factor in at all?
So that's a great question. Does the other parent's income factor in if there's a parent and step parent on the FAFSA? For the FAFSA, for the Vermont Grant, we are all done. With the information that's on the FAFSA. But for those CSS profile schools, they will probably be asking for information from that other parent in addition. So they will ask for that parent's contact information.
Great. Thank you. That's where we are right now.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about maximizing financial aid, right? How do you get the most financial aid possible? Well, one, do well in school, right? And challenge yourself. Increase your school and community involvement. There are a ton of scholarships in the VSAC scholarships book that have a community service component to them. If you have not done community service, you may need to get on that. If you're a junior who's watching this, or the parent of a junior, make sure that they have the opportunity to do that, maybe the summer between the junior and senior year. You want to communicate special circumstances to financial aid offices and to VSAC. And what I mean by that is we're using 2022 income information. And the other night I was doing a presentation and a parent asked me, they said, well, what if I made a lot of overtime pay in 2022 and I haven't seen any of that in 2023? That was a great question. And the way that the parent would communicate this would be to write a letter to each college's financial aid office that their child applied to, as well as to the Vermont Grant program at VSAC, and say what that change was. And financial aid people love actual numbers. So if you can say this impacts our income by $7,500, or this impacts our income by $2,500, let them know those figures, because that will be really helpful in determining what they might need to do to follow up. And then research, but not only research, apply for those scholarships. Everybody's intentions are really good in applying for scholarships, but sometimes people don't pull the trigger and they talk themselves out of it by saying things like, well, I'm not the best student. So if I'm not the best student, why should I apply? Well, you don't know who else is applying. So you might be the best student who's applying. So actually go through with it, meet those deadlines, do the things that you need to do. Let's talk a little bit about how to apply for a Vermont grant. The Vermont grant is open to all Vermont residents. The Vermont grant application is open. I sat the other night with a family, we were talking about financial aid, and the student literally filed the application. It took about 10 minutes, including setting up their My VSAC account. So it takes very little time at all. Again, you want to use the 2024-2025 version for those seniors in the room. It's the year you attend college that we're looking for. It is required for Vermont Grant aid. So there are colleges like Norwich University, Champlain College, University of Vermont. They will estimate a Vermont grant on your financial aid award, but you cannot get that Vermont grant unless you actually apply for it. So it is required that you file the Vermont grant application, even if a college has estimated it for you. We encourage students to apply early, to check their status online. And if there's anything needed, there will be something put on the to-do list online, and we will email the student and say, hey, you need to do something for your Vermont grant. Please come and log in and check it out. You can fill out forms online. You can upload documents, which helps save like all that back and forth through the mail. And also, I mentioned students must create a My VSAC account before they file that Vermont grant application. That same My VSAC account is used to apply for VSAC scholarships. So you actually have a dashboard when you log in. It says work with grants, it says work with scholarships. And so you can apply from that one site. I also mentioned that the Vermont grant is portable. You can use the Vermont grant at in-state and out-of-state colleges. I want to talk about some other ways to reduce costs when we're talking about this. One of the things is to look further, right? You know, in-state, other states, even Canada, when the exchange rate is good, Canadian schools can be very reasonable in cost. The only federal aid that goes across the border is federal student loans, but the Vermont grant can be used at Canadian schools. And our thinking is, Canada's our neighbor. Canada's closer to us than Florida is. So why would we say to students, well, you can use your Vermont grant in Florida, but you can't use it a drive away? So, you know, it's worth it to check that out. When we say look further like other states, one of the things to keep in mind is that there are some institutions that are looking for Vermonters, right? They want to be able to say that they have students from all the states in the US. And if it's a school that doesn't have very many Vermont students, that might be something that they're trying to recruit. What I will say is state-supported institutions probably are an exception to that rule, because state-supported institutions, their goal, their purpose, their mission is in-state students. So they're probably, state-supported schools out of state are probably not spending a lot of money on out-of-state students. Want to think about dual enrollment, early college, or advanced placement. When you're talking to colleges, find out how they treat advanced placement or dual enrollment credit, and how can you use that to potentially shorten the life of your degree. And what that means is that, you know, we were talking about that $80,000 a year school at the beginning, and I think it was $27,000 was the net price. You reduce that by a semester, you're saving yourself $13,000 plus in college costs. So you can really end up reducing college costs if you're able to graduate early because you've taken advantage of all of these opportunities. NEBI is short for the New England Board for Higher Education. And NEBI has a regional student program. So if you live in Vermont and we don't offer a major in Vermont, guess what? We don't have marine biology here because we don't have an ocean. We also don't have any culinary programs at our state schools in Vermont. We don't have interior design at any of our state institutions. You can go to a New England state and a state-supported institution that has that major, and instead of paying full out-of-state tuition, you actually pay a reduced rate. You can look up the regional student guide on the internet, and you can search for that. NEBI is the name of the program with the regional student program. NEBI is the organization that sponsors it. I would highly recommend checking that out, because you may find that if you want a major that isn't offered here, you may find that you can save money. There are also some NEBI schools, New England Board of Higher Education schools, that have started to say, if you're a Vermont resident, we don't care what you major in. We'd love to have you here, and you can save money with NEBI. Some students can start at a school that costs less and then transfer. We see a lot of students start out at Community College of Vermont, which costs a lot less. and then they transfer to that four-year institution. They have that degree that says the nice name on it. No one asks where you started off. They only ask where you got your degree from. You can consider attending locally and commuting. Here at CVU, we are not very far from a number of different colleges that you might be able to commute to. Housing costs can run anywhere from $13,000 to $16,000 a year. So it's the room and also the dining hall plan that you have that would cost that much. If you're living at home and commuting, you can save that money. And then also consider service. There are programs such as AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is a great program where you, it's also a great gap year program if you think about it, where you can work a job through AmeriCorps, and in addition to your stipend and your payment, you also earn scholarship money, or you can pay down your student loans with your AmeriCorps award, which is really great. Additionally, the Vermont Air and Army National Guard programs here in Vermont have a program where you can go for free tuition at Vermont State University, Community College of Vermont, or UVM, and they will give you 1 year of free tuition for 2 years of service. And you can do that concurrently. You can be in college and you can be doing your 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. You can do that while you're in school, and that is another way to help pay. So not all of these suggestions are for everybody, but they are ways that you can think about to reduce your costs when you're, really thinking about how expensive college can be. So let's talk about ways to pay. If you were to think of this like a three-legged stool, right? You can rely on things like past income, present income, and future income, like using the broadest of brushstrokes on this. So past income would be savings, or if you have a college savings plan. Present income are things like payment plans where you pay over the 10 months of the school year and you do regular monthly payments and you pay that off that way. Some people will use income tax credits. There's a federal tax credit for education. And I had a student had a parent, last night at a presentation ask me, well, how does this work? And I will tell you, I'm not a tax preparer, nor do I play one on TV. But publication 970 actually talks specifically about tax credits for education. And then additionally, scholarships are considered present income. And sometimes families will say to their students, your contribution to college can be partially through the scholarships that you earn. Future income is basically borrowing. So there's a thing called the Parent Plus loan. Interesting because PLUS stands for parent loans for undergraduate students, but it's a PLUS loan for parents. There could be additional student loans that students could take out, or private loans, and then other borrowing options. When mortgage interest rates were a lot lower, I would do these presentations and people would ask me afterwards, they'd say, well, why would I want to pay 6% for this loan when I can get a home equity line of credit for 2.5 to 3? And I would say, you're right. I don't know why you would do that, but every family has different strengths or different things that they can use. And so it's important to think about if you're borrowing, how will you borrow and what will you use? Obviously, if you don't have one of these three things, for instance, you have no savings, then you have to rely more on present income and borrowing. Or if you don't have the ability to borrow for some reason, you have to rely on your savings and your present income in order to be able to pay for this. And many families will use something from all three. They might use some savings, they might be using payment plans, scholarships, tax credits, and they might also be borrowing on top of that. So let's talk a little bit about savings. The more you save, the less you have to borrow. And for many of you who are on this presentation, you totally get that. And it almost seems like, why do I have to say that? But really, every dollar you have saved is less that you do have to borrow. And you can think about how much can you add to your savings before you need to borrow for college? Like how much can you set aside if you were doing that? What can students do, for instance? So how much can students add to their savings through gifts that they might receive or through summer employment? what I will say to you about savings is that parent savings, parent assets in general are very heavily protected in the SAI calculation. And the reason why they're very heavily protected is because it's known that parents need savings for a rainy day. They need it for possibly to fund retirement someday. So savings are pretty heavily protected. I will sometimes hear people say, oh, before you file your FAFSA, make sure to spend down all your savings. Please don't do that. I think that that myth can really be hurtful. Let me give you an example. $25,000 of parental savings could impact your SAI by $1,700 to $2,000. So $25,000 of parental savings really impacts it by max $2,000. You'd much rather probably have the $25,000 and pay the $2,000 out of it rather than not have it. Are we seeing any questions about assets, Naomi, and savings? Okay, perfect. I'll keep moving. Let's talk about federal loans. I mentioned earlier that if you file a FAFSA, the student can be eligible for federal loans. There are limits as far as how much federal loan a student can borrow. And when you think about that $80,000 a year school, I keep picking on them. I feel so bad for them. But when you think about how expensive colleges can be, even at 27 for an average net price, $5,500 does not go a super long way, right? So the freshman year, the limit is $5,500 in federal student loan. The sophomore year, it's $6,500. The junior and senior year is about $7,500 each year. So there are limits. And we want to keep this borrowing in mind whenever we're considering additional borrowing, because I think sometimes families forget about this. The student will apply using the FAFSA. The college will then say what kind of eligibility the student has, because some of the loans can be subsidized and some can be unsubsidized. If a student's showing financial need, subsidized loans means the government's paying the interest while the student's in school. Unsubsidized loans means the student is responsible for interest while they're in school. And so really important to kind of think about that. But you can see how it adds up with the cumulative borrowed. By the senior year, if you're borrowing the maximum amount, there's $27,000 right there. So let's talk a little bit more about loan options. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on these slides, but here's what I will tell you. Every year on July 1, the US Department of Education sets a new rate. And so when students borrow a federal loan, they have an interest rate for that year's loan. The next year, there's going to be an interest rate for the next year's loan. It might not be the same. The next year is another interest rate. We recommend that students accept the federal loans first because there are so many protections on them. There's income-based repayment programs. There's a new program called SAVE, Saving on a Valuable Education, which is really going to help students a lot with repaying their loans and making sure that it is not bankrupting them to pay off their student loans. So really important to keep in mind. And then additional borrowing. VSAC is a lender of private student loans, but what I can tell you for students is that a lot of times if a student is borrowing, they have to have a cosigner. So that is a credit-worthy person who agrees to be their co-borrower. And if the student does not repay, it's the parent who's on the line, or the co-borrower, sorry, because it's not always a parent, but many times it is. And then I'm also going to talk about parent loan options. One thing I want to mention to you is the PLUS loan for parents. There are some colleges that will actually put a PLUS loan on their financial aid notification, and it will look like a student is covered. It's like, oh, the cost of the school is $52,000 a year, and I have $52,000. Look at that, I'm covered. And then you look and you see there is this Parent Plus loan of $30,000 on the financial aid notification. The only people who can say how much they can borrow is the parents themselves. So even though the college said you have eligibility for this amount, does not necessarily mean that families can do that. And remember, we're not just doing this for 1 year, we're doing this for 2 years and possibly 4 years. So you want to consider that and think about how much borrowing is going on. The only limit on a federal plus loan is the cost of the college minus the financial aid offer. They do not look at what the parent's ability to borrow is. All right. I want to talk about some calculators. There are some great calculators out there. One is the federal student aid calculator. And this slide I just changed because I went online today. The federal student aid estimator is online and working. You can actually do a quick, what will my SAI look like and how much federal aid will I be eligible for? It's not going to cover institutional financial aid. It's not going to talk about your Vermont Grant, but it will talk about federally what students would be eligible for. And then there's also Mapping Your Future. What I love about Mapping Your Future is that they have a student loan debt to salary wizard. And so when a student is talking to me about borrowing and we're having conversations about how much, and they really, I sometimes don't know if 18 or 19-year-olds truly understand the borrowing and the amount of borrowing and what your monthly payment will be when you're done. But the debt salary wizard, you can estimate 4 years of borrowing. And then what it comes up with is this is what you need to make in order to pay off that loan. And I find that to be particularly helpful and a nice reality check for students when they're thinking about, borrowing and they want to borrow quite a bit of money. So those are two calculators, two resources I highly recommend. CVU and many high schools in the state have these junior and senior year planning checklists, which we go through each year. The senior year one has been updated, but talking about next steps for the junior year and things that students can be doing with their parents as part of having this conversation and doing this research about colleges. And then also there are next steps for senior year, right? Make sure to research the forms and deadlines that are required by colleges. That's so important. Creating those federal student aid accounts, that FSA ID. Let me just mention, if you need help with creating an FSA ID, we have folks at VSAC who can help you with that. And on our events page on the VSAC website, you can actually see an opportunity to sign up for either a virtual or an in-person appointment to help sign up for an FSA ID with a person at the VSAC Resource Center in Winooski. Students also need to create a My VSAC account. You want to gather up that family financial aid, that family financial information in order to file those financial aid applications. So go find that 2022 tax form because that's what you're going to be using. Also, file the Vermont Grant application, do the FAFSA when it finally comes out, sign up for Forms Night at CVU. I think we are talking about January 24th as our night that I will be at CVU helping families with file the FAFSA. We want to encourage students to file that VSAC Unified Scholarship application. It's great because there's simply a drop-down menu. So if you find 4 VSAC scholarships you want to apply for, you pick those 4, use the drop-down menu, you file 1 application, and that will be what you need. Then VSAC will also tell you on the screen, after your application gets uploaded, they will actually show you on the screen what documents you still need to get in order to finalize your VSAC scholarship application. And then also apply for other scholarships. Be in touch with your school counselor, find out about local scholarships. I know that average students get scholarships too. So be sure to apply. And then also we've got some great resources on our website. We have one that's specific to paying for college and using that. We have a paying for college guide, which is available online. And also financial aid forms help. Let's talk about that. The FAFSA has a 1-800 number and they have hours from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Friday, 11 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday. They are closed most of the major federal holidays. For the FAFSA and the Vermont Grant, you can call us at VSAC between the hours of 8 and 4:30, and we can also help you with that. There's a chat bot on the FAFSA. His name is Aiden. He's a cute little owl. You might find him very helpful. VSAC also has that virtual and in-person help. When the FAFSA becomes available, we'll have FAFSA appointments in addition to FSA ID appointments in Winooski as well as online. And so just be certain to keep your eyes open. There's lots of help for this. We have an education loan guide, and there's a new expanded section on ways to minimize educational debt. It's available on our website. You can order it. It is not a here's why you should borrow a VSAC loan brochure. It is a brochure that we put together with college financial aid people, current college students, parents of college students, and education professionals in order to help people understand this process. And then certainly, please feel free to follow us on social media. I'm sure that when the FAFSA opens, we're going to be all over it in addition to federal student aid. But you can certainly follow us on social media and see what's going on. We do have reminders about things going up. And that was a lot of information. And we did that in just about an hour. I realize I speak very rapidly, so thank goodness this is recorded on YouTube. But I was just wondering, does this create some questions for other folks? Are there more questions coming up?
So Carrie, we have a question about the Vermont Grant and if the student or the parent should create the account initially.
So the student should create the account. It's the student's account initially. So there's nothing wrong with sharing that information with a parent if that relationship is there. But yes, it should be the student's account.
Great. And then we have a question about where this presentation will be. We'll have this posted on the Direction Center website. Great. And I think that's all we have. Oh, and a thank you. Very informative session, Carrie. So yeah, nice job.
Good. Well, hopefully for the seniors and the parents of seniors who are watching this, please know you are not alone in this process. There are a lot of folks out there to help you. And we realize that it is very stress-inducing, but you will get through this. And we hope that you will use us as a resource. We are certainly glad to help wherever we can.
Great. Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks very much.
All right, we are, this live stream is out.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, great job. Nice.
Good job.